Welcome back to Tightwad Workshop. In this video we'll be making a small folding table from these two pallets. I'll dismantle the first pallet in the same way as an E-pal. This piece of plywood will become the top of our table, so try not to damage it any further. I'll use the big stick method to dismantle this second pallet. Now I'll remove all the nails and we can choose the best boards for the project. The plywood top's been damaged, probably by a forklift. Normally I'd just go and find a better pallet, but let's see if we can salvage this one. We'll start by cutting the damaged edges off the plywood. I'm using one of the pallet's bottom boards as a straight edge to mark the lines. Now I'll set up my saw stools and saw off the damaged edges. When the scrap edge starts to whip around, just move that first saw stool to support it. You might also need to put a wedge in the cut if the saw blade's getting stuck. Now we can select two thick boards for the table legs. First I'll cut them to 800mm long. Next I'll set the combination square to half the board width and mark a line along the middle of each board. Now I'll use our restored Diston rip saw to cut out the legs. We also need to ripsaw two of the thin pallet boards for the table frame. Now we need to do some repair work on the plywood tabletop. I'll use part of this scrap piece of plywood to make a patch. Now I'll place the patch in position and mark around it with a knife. I'll make the lines a little deeper with a chisel, then start removing the broken plywood. Once the hole's cleaned up, the patch will fit in tightly. I'll glue the top together on our trestles to keep the workbench available for other jobs while the glue dries. Use your mallet to tap that patch firmly into place. I'll use this plastic film to prevent the joint from getting stuck to the clamps. I'll use this piece of scrap wood to spread the clamp pressure evenly. If we're lucky, this should work well enough. While we wait for the tabletop glue to dry, we can get to work planing the other parts. I'm just working to make all the surfaces smooth, clean and square at this point. We'll work on their dimensions a little later. Even rough old pallet wood like this cleans up nicely under the plane. It's getting late and the light is fading, so I'll clean up and start again tomorrow. Our patch worked quite well, so now we need to slice the top of it to match the rest of the plywood. I'll start with some saw cuts and a chisel. Then I'll finish it off with the plane. I'll just remove this last ragged edge with the chisel. Now we can lay out the table's top frame. Next we'll need to plane the four frame boards to the same width. I'll start by finding and marking the least flat edge of each board. Once all the bad edges are marked, I'll measure the width of the narrowest one. Now I'll set my marking gauge to that measurement. I made this marking gauge a long time ago. It isn't very good, but it's like an old friend now. I'll fill in the gauge line with pencil so you can see it easier. Once we've marked both sides of each board, we just need to carefully plane down to those lines. That leaves all 4 of our frame boards the same width. This plywood likes to split, so I'm going to drill the holes for the nails. I'll start by laying the frame on the top side of the plywood. I've made the frame slightly smaller than the plywood, so I can plane the plywood down for a neat fit. I'll mark a light pencil line around the inside of the frame. Now I'll mark the locations for the nails. I promised you no power tools, so I'll drill the holes with this antique egg beater drill. It's at least 60 years old and it still works perfectly. Once all the holes are drilled, I'll lay out the frame and apply some glue to it. Now we can put the plywood on top. I'll only put these nails in halfway until I've checked the alignment. Check each side with the square before you nail it on. Now that everything's square, you can put the remaining nails in. The next time I make a table like this, I'll remember to nail the 4 frame edges together before I attach the top. Nailing the frame parts together first would have made the assembly a lot easier. Now I'll finish driving in all the nails. Next I'll use this punch to countersink the nails. That'll make it easier to sand the surface of the table. Now we can flip the table over and clean up the excess glue. The legs will fit inside the table like this, offset from each other. Each pair of legs will be attached with hinges so they can fold up and down. The next step is to make the top board for each pair of legs. We'll be using a saddle joint, which will need these parts to be cut out. Once the cuts have been made, the joint will slide together this way. The 4 joints will all be slightly different, so I'll label the 2 parts of each joint. Now I'll mark out the cutting lines for the joint. I had to make this central part slightly bigger than 1/3 of the board width so that my chisel would fit. Now I can mark the end of the board and I'm ready to saw along the lines. You can use your holdfast this way to clamp a workpiece vertically. Try to saw on the waste side of the pencil lines, so if you make a mistake you can still salvage the part. Use one of your holdfasts to secure the part to the bench. Then set to work removing the waste with your mallet and chisel. Turn the part over when you get to halfway, otherwise you'll break out the other side of the wood. Now we need to mark the cutting lines for the other half of the joint. This doesn't work well with a pencil because it can't reach fully into the corner. We can get a more accurate line using a chisel. Press the flat side of the chisel against the slot and push the sharp edge into the wood. Now we need to cut this second joint to the chisel lines. We can saw the sides using a bench hook in the usual way. For the end cuts, I'll just use the holdfast like we did before. If you line the two parts up like this, you can see where you need to remove extra material to make the joint fit. Use your chisel to remove a little at a time and retest the fit. Eventually you'll have a joint that snaps together tightly. Once we've finished cutting all four joints, we can glue and clamp everything together. Make sure you wipe off any spilled glue, otherwise your clamps will get stuck. Check for squareness, then fit the clamps. Now check for squareness again, just in case the clamp has moved the joint. Glue and clamp the other pair of legs in the same way. Use some scrap wood in your holdfast to clamp the leg ends down to the bench. Then check one last time for squareness, because this is your last chance to fix any mistakes. The legs are made from soft pine, and the sharp corners will be easily damaged. I'm going to mark and cut a chamfer on all four corners of each leg. I'll use a pencil to mark this line rather than the marking gauge, because that way any remaining pencil lines can be sanded off. Once the lines are marked, I'll cut the chamfers with a spoke shave. Sorry about that bad focus. I think that looks quite good. Now it's time to plane the edge of the plywood down flush with the frame. Always plane inwards from the corners or you'll cause breakouts in the plywood. Next we can fit the hinges to the legs. Use your pencil to mark the hole locations. Then use the drill to make the pilot holes for the screws. Try not to drill the holes all the way through the plywood top. Next, screw the hinges to the leg assemblies. These screws are too long for the plywood, so I'll shorten them with my pliers. Fit the second leg assembly in the same way. We need to add a locking bar so the legs don't fold up while the table is in use. This locking bar will also hold the legs in their folded position. We need to cut a notch in each leg assembly for the locking bar. I'll saw the ends of the notch because that'll leave a better finish. Now I'll chisel out the waste. Once the second notch is finished, we can cut the locking bar to length. This is how the locking bar will work. The plywood's too weak to screw the middle of the locking bar directly to it, so I'll mark around this block of wood, then attach it to the plywood. I'll use our trusty antique drill to make the pilot holes. My hands are getting sore from all these screws, but a screwdriver bit in this brace will be much faster. Now we can attach the locking bar with a few screws. Next I'll clear away the tools and we can give the table a test. Lift the end of the locking bar to fold the legs. The locking bar also holds the legs firmly in their folded positions. In the next video I'll sand the table and apply some finish. I haven't decided yet on oil, wax or paint. If you have a suggestion, please leave a comment. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Tightwad Workshop is filmed in front of a live studio audience.